After high school, I spent one long year in art school. When that didn't work out, due to the fact that I wasn't good enough, I spent the next 2 years finding out that the army wasn't to my liking either. Taking advantage of my hard-won benefits, I came home and enrolled in a 3-year architectural drafting school, which I really enjoyed. So here I am, sitting on a bar stool with more than one shot knocked back in me, celebrating my graduation with 5 of my best friends in the world. It felt like my life was finally getting better. "I'd like to propose a toast," said Brian, one of my best buddies, raising his glass. "To Steve, one of the dumbest sons of bitches I've ever met." "Here, here," everyone yelled, finishing what was left in their glasses and looking for our waitress or bartender to order another round. And then I saw her standing behind the bar. Maybe I'd had a little too much to drink, or maybe the alcohol had clouded my judgment, but still, she caught not only my eye, but both of them. Despite the fact that there isn't a shy bone in my body, I should have just stared and said nothing. But by this point, alcohol had taken over my brain and my mouth was just at the ready. It started with me glancing at her name tag. "Beth, do you like the name David?" I asked the pretty bartender as she poured us another round of drinks. "What?" she asked. She probably didn't hear what I asked her because of the noise in the establishment. "Do you like the name David?" I repeated the question. "Yeah, I guess it's okay. Is that your name or something else?" "No, it's the name I picked out for our firstborn if it's a boy. But I'm not too sure what we'll name him if it's a girl," I said, still absorbing her gaze. My buddy Brian looked on in bewilderment and amazement. "Are you going to marry this girl, Steve?" asked Brian, looking at me. "As soon as she says yes." "Well, I will. I didn't even know you guys were dating." Things went downhill from there. Everyone kept drinking and asking me when I was going to ask her. Before I knew it, my fupa had spilled over to the other 3 tables and everyone started toasting to Beth and me. "To Beth and Steve, may they always be as happy as they are at this moment," Brian announced to the entire bar, standing on a table in the center of the room. Everyone applauded and raised their glasses to Beth, who smiled behind the bar, shaking her head from side to side. A rather tipsy girl jumped up on the table and said she hoped our honeymoon was half as hot as hers. She blushed, took a sip of her drink, and gave a big kiss to the guy I hoped was her husband. There was another roar. Everyone took a glass each and toasted to us again. It was getting pretty wild. It seemed like the whole bar, including all the bartenders, had gotten into the act. Who started chanting, "Ask her, ask her, ask her, ask her." I have no idea, but within a few minutes, everyone around was shouting it and stomping their feet. As Brian and Tommy carried me to the bar and placed me in front of Beth, the whole room fell into silence except for the 2 rather intoxicated girls standing next to me. "Steve, you have to do it on one knee, don't you know anything?" shouted one of the women next to me. So, very wobbly, I got down on one knee and immediately fell over. Brian picked me up by my ass, patted me on the head, and told me to try to do it right this time. Trying to focus and stay upright at the same time, I looked into those 2 deep brown eyes of Beth's and asked her to marry me or something. Then I fell a second time. There was dead silence in the bar as Brian and Tommy lifted my ass off the dirty floor. Beth was trying not to laugh, but she was having a hard time doing so. Finally, she looked at me, then at all her friends behind the bar, and then back at me. "Sure, why not? I don't have any plans for tonight after work anyway," she said, starting to laugh. She leaned over and kissed me to seal our bond. The hall erupted with applause, laughter, and 3 more drinks. Everyone was congratulating the 2 of us. I looked at her, smiled, and that, my friends, is the last thing I remember. The next morning, I woke up not in my bed and with the worst hangover of my life. It took me about 10 minutes to see that I was still alive, breathing and in Brian's apartment. I saw that I was fully dressed except for my shoes. I found the bathroom and only wished my body would calm down a little. I contemplated whether to shove a finger or my whole hand down my throat. A voice shouting from the stairs that breakfast was ready brought me out of my momentary stupor. No, somehow I managed to make it down the stairs in one piece. Brian's wife, Angie, poured me a cup of hot black coffee and slid me a plate of toast. "Eat this. It'll absorb at least a little of what's in your stomach." Food was the last thing I wanted, but she didn't take no for an answer. "In case you're wondering, Brian and I carried your sorry ass down here last night. You passed out right after the wedding." That sobered me up, at least enough to get my mind working again. I guess the wedding night wasn't too good, since you passed out and all. But you sure made a mess out there when you got down on one knee and proposed to her. When she said yes, the whole place went crazy. Everyone started planning your wedding and honeymoon. You, however, passed out after the third or fourth drink. By the way, where are you two going on your honeymoon? She laughed, returning to the stove to attend to the bacon, which I could hear sizzling in her black cast-iron skillet. Very funny, I replied, still trying to remember exactly what had happened. The only thing I was sure of was that Beth had stolen my heart last night. As they say, love at first sight? When Brian came downstairs, he was washed, shaved, and overly chipper. How's the ruddy groom doing? He asked. It's the blushing bride, silly, his wife shouted back at him. Never mind. How was the wedding night? Was she as you expected? Was she here? I looked back toward the stairs hopefully. Nah, just messing with you, he said, chuckling. Not bad looking, but a little too skinny for my taste, he said, slapping Angie on the back and then turning her around and kissing her hard. Well, that was a great night. I haven't had this much fun in a long time. I hope that girl wasn't too upset with you, but I don't think so, because by the end of the night, her tip jar was full. Her name is Beth, I said, still working on my first cup of coffee. Well, anyway, after all that, did you at least get her phone number? I shook my head. No. Hell, I even lost my damn shoes somehow. Brian dropped me off at the bar so I could get my car. Mine wasn't the only one still parked in the parking lot. It must have been one hell of a party. I only wish I could remember it all. It took me a whole 24 hours to come to my senses. I made 100 promises to myself to never drink again, but I knew they wouldn't last much longer than my hangover. 2 days after work, I was at Tony's again with flowers in my hands. I was determined to apologize to Beth for making a fool of myself and maybe get her phone number this time. As soon as I walked through the door, a bunch of people must have recognized me from the other night and started clapping. Not seeing her on the floor, I walked over to the bar and asked one of the bartenders if Beth was working. The girl yelled out, "Beth, your husband is here to see you." She laughed, and she wasn't the only one. Beth came out of the back room, wiping her hands on a towel, and immediately saw me. I see you're still alive. I wasn't sure you'd make it. At least she was smiling and not throwing things at me, which was a good sign. I'm sorry about the other night. I guess things got out of hand. These are for you, I said, holding out a bouquet of cut flowers to her. It's kind of a peace offering. When her friend from behind the bar said I should have given her flowers and courted her before the wedding instead of after, everyone started laughing again. I must have put myself out there that night. Sevina, thanks for the flowers, but you didn't have to do that. Your friends and pretty much everyone else who was here that night filled my tip jar when someone stuck a honeymoon fund sign on it. Again, like I said, I apologize if I confused you. That wasn't my intention, I told her, eating as much crow as I could cram into my mouth. Don't worry, I had a lot of fun that night. With all the hustle and bustle and fun, the hours flew by, and before I knew it, I was engaged, had a good startup capital for my honeymoon, and was watching my fiancé being carried passed out to someone's car. All in all, a pretty interesting evening. She was still smiling, and I realized she didn't think I was a complete moron. So, let me try again, I said, taking a deep breath and putting on my best smile. Hi, Beth. My name is Steve Moore, and I'd love to take you out on a real date if that's what you want. Steve, you seem like a really nice guy, but honestly, I don't have time to add a guy to my busy schedule right now. I work at least 3 nights a week and go to school almost every day. Between school, work, and homework, I don't even have time for myself. But you still have to eat, don't you? Steve, I take my lunch from my bag when I go to school. I just don't have time for a formal lunch. Sorry, maybe sometime later. What's that stupid cliche saying, where there's a will, there's a way? Well, I guess when you're in love with someone, your brain works at maximum capacity. 2 phone calls to her boss at the Tonys, and I had the beginnings of a great plan. I found out that Beth always took a lunch break between 8:30 and 9 o'clock when she worked. I then told Kenny, her boss, about my plans for Friday night. Look, Steve, if you want to have an affair with her, I have no problem, but if it disrupts my business, I'm out. Got it? I agreed to his terms, but What choice did I have? Firing her wouldn't have been too cool, so with the approval of her boss and a little help from the head bartender, I put my plan into action. At 7:45, I picked up the two entrees I'd ordered the night before at Antonio's. I had already stopped by the liquor store for a bottle of wine. The bakery had prepared a dessert especially for the occasion. At 8:15, with a hot bag and cooler in hand, I walked into the bar and settled in at the corner table they had reserved especially for us. I'm done at 8:25, 5 minutes to spare, I thought to myself. At 8:28, I lit the two small candles on the table. At exactly 8:30, Beth's boss called her in and informed her that dinner was waiting for her, pointing in my direction. Beth walked over, not quite sure what was going on. "Steve, I told you," she began, until I stopped her. "You still need to eat, don't you? I stopped at McDonald's and got you something on the way here. Nothing fancy, just something to eat." She smiled, looking at the table. "I don't like Chablis wine," she said, sitting down. It seemed like everyone in the place was looking at us. Note number one to myself, no Chablis wine? Anything else? "Steve, just sit down and eat. I only have half an hour to tackle this dish." The food was good. Hell, the food was great. It better have been so for the money I paid for it. We ate in silence, keeping our eyes on each other. She only had half a glass of wine, saying something about not drinking on the job. When we got to dessert, she smiled and shook her head. It was a tiny white cake with an even tinier bride and groom on top. Written in red icing were the words, "Just married." "You're not giving up, are you?" "Not when I see what I want." She shook her head again as more than one person walked by to see what the hell we were doing. At exactly 8:54, we were done. She looked me straight in the eye and asked me what I had planned for tomorrow night. "You'll have to wait until tomorrow. Now we'll see, won't we?" "You're crazy, you know that?" "If I wasn't, you probably wouldn't be having dinner with me right now, would you?" She stood up, pecked me on the lips, and went back to work. "Yeah," I said, clenching my fist and tasting what was left of her on my lips. With my paycheck, there was no way I could have these dinners every night, so on the nights she worked, I did things differently. Shish kebab, Caesar salad, French rolls, Mexican food, roasts, all of which I could make at home and bring to the bar. She eventually relented and let me take her to the movies, but I had to drop her off right after. Something about a term paper due in 2 days. On her days off, I would call her or email her. I was persistent, but I also kept my distance and gave her the freedom she asked for. A few of her friends at the bar said that if she didn't want me, then let her flip me to her place. After finals, we had our first proper date. I picked Beth up at her parents' house. I brought a box of chocolates for her and flowers for her mother. I tried every trick I could think of. Her mom and dad looked me over, and within 5 minutes we were out the door. I was going to rent a 2-seater sports car for the night, but after finding out how much they wanted for a Porsche or Viper, I quickly put that idea out of my mind. So I picked her up in my 8-year-old Chevy Impala. At least it was washed and freshly vacuumed. "And then, I don't even want to ask what you have planned for tonight," she said, getting into my car while I held the door open for her. She commented that chivalry wasn't dead after all. "I hope your passport is in order because our flight to Paris leaves in 2 hours." I smiled. She didn't. "Steve, you're trying too hard. I don't expect or want to be fed dinner every night. How about tonight we go out for pizza and just talk? What do you say?" We were kicked out of Pizza Hut just before 11. This time I became a listener, which was hard as hell for me. She started out in elementary school and then worked her way up. Her passion was graphic design and marketing. Beth said she was pretty good at it, but not yet good enough to get the job she wanted. She had one goal and no one, including me, was going to stop her from achieving it. As she put it, I could help and support her or get out of the way. It was my choice. It wasn't an option for me, I was in love. That's how I met Beth and did everything I could to gain her favor. Our acquaintance was full of pitfalls and compromises, but we persevered and moved forward. However, from day one when we first started dating, I was told that we would either be exclusive or not at all. "Sir, I don't want to worry about you coming to me after you've been with someone else. I don't share. If you're with me to the end." In some ways, I think it was some crazy ordeal, but Beth didn't have anything to worry about, at least not to me. That year and a half until she graduated was the longest of my life. Between my full-time job, plus overtime when we were busy, and her crazy schedule, we grabbed every spare minute. Often she was so tired that we would just sit on her couch in the basement and watch TV. Or, to paraphrase, I watched TV while she slept in my arms. No consolation prize because I had her in my arms. And then, backstage at the college, as diplomas were being handed out, an 8-foot diameter silver balloon went up with only one thing written on it. "You did it, Beth." Everyone laughed and clapped, and Beth accepted her hard-won diploma with a red face. Her graduation party was nothing like mine. It was held at her parents' house, and there was plenty of food. I donated a keg of beer, but I tried not to overdo it this time. Her family, friends, and even a few classmates showed up. I stood back and watched her, happy that it was finally over. I had bought her something and planned to give it to her that night, but changed my mind at the last minute. It was her day, not ours. She deserved everyone's attention, and there was no way I was going to interfere with that, even though I was secretly ready to explode. To my horror, it wasn't something I really wanted to get her, but with my paycheck, I couldn't afford what I thought she really deserved. It was white gold, weighing no more than half a carat. There were 2 small baguette-cut diamonds on each side, and the center stone was set high enough to make it look and shine on its own. Well, that's what I thought. We'd talked about marriage, at least I talked about it, but I always got rejected when I brought it up. "Steve, I really care about you, but I can't even think about a commitment like marriage until I finish school and get a job. What happens if I get a good job and I get transferred somewhere far away? Will you quit your job, pull up stakes and follow me? We'll have plenty of time to talk about it once we're both settled." Unlike her, I had already found a great job. I was working for Centex Homes and was moving up the ladder. I started strictly on the drawing board, making changes to existing drawings when the customer required one change or another. Periodically working with crews in the field gave me the hands-on experience and confidence I was sorely lacking when I first started. The plumbing was fairly easy to master, especially with the new PVC pipes, but the electrical was something I struggled with more than once. It took me about 2 years to finally gain the trust of the crews that I knew what the hell I was doing when I did this or that revision. When I spent weekends pulling wires when 2 workers got sick, they stopped calling me a rookie and finally accepted me almost as an equal. Heck, most guys had at least 10 to 15 years of work under their belt, and my measly 2 years was just past the rookie stage. Like I said, I was pretty much one of them. "Steve, I need you to give me your best estimate of labor and materials, what these changes are going to cost me," my boss, Greg, asked one evening shortly before 5. He handed me a stack of changes and a roll of blueprints. "Also, I need this done by noon tomorrow, if at all possible." This was said with his damn know-it-all smile. "No problem," I said, without even looking at what he gave me. I regretted not opening my big mouth before I familiarized myself with the changes. For the first time in months, I begged not to take Beth on a date. I told her I had my own test to study for. Being the consummate student she understood. I finished my preliminary calculations by 1 o'clock in the morning and, after checking and rechecking the numbers, handed them to my boss just before my coffee break at 9:30. Greg took everything, along with a fresh cup of coffee, into his office and closed the door. I figured he'd have something to say by noon, or at least by the end of the workday, but he didn't. At 5:30, I was still sitting at my desk when he came out, wished me a good evening, and left. I spent a miserable night brooding, doubting my numbers and even myself. By 9 o'clock the next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. "Greg, I was wondering if you had a chance to look at those numbers I gave you yesterday," I said, poking my head into his office. "Yeah, they look okay," he said, not looking up from the pile of papers he was working on at his desk. "Good, thanks, I guess," replied I uncertainly. Now he looked up. "Steve, I'm paying you to do what I ask you to do right the first time. If I didn't like the numbers, don't worry, you'd be the first to know," he said with a smile. "Now, if you have nothing else to do, I'm sure I can find something for you to do." "No, I have plenty to do, I'm just curious." "Look, you did a great job. Maybe next week we can talk about you doing some more assignments for me. I'm busy right now, so if that's okay with you." I was out of there in a flash, but I had a huge Cheshire Cat smile on my face that could only disappear if it was surgically removed. I'd made it through. I had a future with them if that's what I wanted. And at least I was learning something I could take with me anywhere. After that week, Greg always gave me more than I could handle. I felt like I was back in school and he was the teacher, giving me test after test to see how far I'd gotten. More than once I was ready to cry uncle, but never did. My father didn't raise dropouts. 6 months later, he handed me 4 sets of blueprints and told me I'd been promoted and that I should get into pricing as soon as possible. I thought that's what I'd been doing all this time. Yeah, I guess it was. But now you have a position that comes with it. That night, Beth and I went out to dinner to celebrate. Night after night, I walked around with that damn ring in my pocket. So many times I wanted to get down on one knee and ask her, but all the time something happened, or it just wasn't the right time. Friday turned out to be that night again. We went to a movie, bought pizza, and went back to her parents' house to eat. With her dark brown hair gathered in a ponytail, I scrutinized her face and eyes. I was hopelessly in love with this woman. She wasn't a 10 in everyone's book, but she was a 10 in mine. In the middle of eating a slice of pizza, I stopped and kissed her. "Wow, what brought that on?" asked Beth, pulling away a little. "Beth, I'm in love with you. No, I need you to be with me, by my side." "Steve, what are you saying?" "You know exactly what I'm saying. The same thing I've been saying for a year now. I want to marry you and live happily ever after like a fairy tale. Steve, we just have to wait a little longer. I have 2 job offers and I need to be sure. We've come this far. What's another year or so?" "A year or so?" I exclaimed, a little too loudly. This time, I was the only one who backed off. "Steve, I've told you from day one that I want to settle on a job before I commit myself to anyone. Even if I get the job I want, it will be at least a year before I can relax and settle down a bit. I need to focus on what's important to me now, and that's using what I've been taught for the last 4.5 years. My boner was gone, and so was my good mood. I shoved the ring deeper into my pocket. My appetite was gone, and for the first time in a long time I wasn't fascinated by Beth. No. What happens a year from now and you're not quite where you want to be?" "Well, I'll just watch then," she replied. "Beth, it's getting late and I have a lot of work to do before Monday morning. If you don't mind, I think I'll go to bed," I told her as I got up. "Steve, please don't be mad." "Beth, I'm not mad," I told her, knowing it was a lie. "I'll call you later, okay?" I said, putting on my jacket to leave. "I care about you, you know that, right?" I looked into her eyes when she said that, but for the first time they weren't looking at me like they had since that night at the bar when I proposed to her the first time. "I gotta go." She walked me to the front door, kissed me, and asked me again not to be mad. I wasn't mad, but something inside me was, and it wasn't good. The half-hour drive to my apartment took almost 2 hours as I drove in circles. Did I love her? Hell yes. It wasn't a question. But for the first time, I realized that even though I'd put her first in my life, I was way down the list in hers, and I wasn't satisfied with that anymore. She was right. She had said from the beginning that she wanted to settle her career before marriage. I thought that maybe I had never heard what she was telling me. I just thought that when she graduated, we would connect, get married, and live happily ever after. I guess I wasn't as good a listener as I thought I was. After that night, I stopped carrying the ring around with me. I can't say my love died, but it was like a gas oven where the flames went from hot to warm. Beth took a job with a large marketing firm, Anderson and Phillips. She started all over again, relearning what she had been taught, but now in their way. There were seminars, trade shows, and lots of trips to clients. I was still the one being chased, but one Thursday night I just stopped. I watched my cell phone ring. I knew by heart the number that was calling from. I just watched the ringing until it stopped. This scenario repeated itself 10 more times that weekend and continued throughout the following week. I was constantly arguing with myself about what I wanted and what I was willing to give up for it. It was late, probably closer to 6:30, when I left the office and headed for the parking lot. I'd spent half the night trying to impress my boss into giving me a raise. I saw a nice 2-bedroom house I wanted to buy, but I didn't want to save up to pay rent. In other words, I didn't want to be poor. I saw her car parked next to mine in the lot and knew she had to be here somewhere. "You're avoiding me," Beth said, folding her arms in front of her. "Not avoiding, just Not following you anymore. Stalking me? She said in a tone that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You know, calling, texting, begging you to go out with me, following you around like a lost puppy? Steve, I never asked you to do that. I know, and that's the problem. Beth, what do you want? Why are you here? Steve, I want things to be like they were between us before. I really care about you. Say, Steve, I really love you and I want to be your wife, I told her. Why are you being so difficult? She quickly replied. I unlocked the car, threw my briefcase in the back seat, and got behind the wheel. You see, here's the problem. That little puppy that's been following you around all this time has grown up and is no longer content with baby babble. I started the car. When you're ready to talk to me like an adult, call me. I drove off. Maybe I'd finally grown up. You're killing me, Steve, Greg said when I told, not asked, him for a promotion. Things are tight, you know that. Greg, you have a choice. You either give me what I deserve or I'm out. Hell, just because you're pissed at your girlfriend doesn't mean you have to be a horse's ass. I'll give you until Friday, and then I'll leave, I told him. And for once I wasn't bluffing. He was getting off cheap, and we both knew it. I wanted to stay because he was a damn good teacher, but I also wanted a fair salary. I knew his competitor would give me more than I demanded from Greg, but I was above just walking away without giving him a chance to give me what I wanted. I guess my skin was starting to get a little thicker. It had been forever since I'd dated Brian and Angie. I'd neglected my friends, mostly centering my life around Beth. Thought you were dead, Brian said, touching our beer bottles when Angie poked him in the ribs with her elbow. You know where he was, and your fingers aren't broken either, she snapped back. Angie let him think he was in control, but everyone knew the truth. Sorry to hear about you and Beth. Maybe she'll come to her senses yet, Angie said in a motherly tone. Said, there's little chance of that happening. She'll become a career woman first, and whatever's left is no longer satisfactory to me. I'll buy this round, I said, beckoning the waitress over. We won't have to carry you out again, will we? It looks like you've put on a few pounds, and Brian's mom is coming to visit, so I'm not sure where we'll leave you this time. Angie laughed. Hell's bells, woman. My mom hasn't had a single date since my dad died. She'd probably love to date a good-looking guy like Steve. Make it 2 rounds, I said, trying to get that image out of my head. No, I wasn't blown away, but I did give the waitress a good tip, and she gave me her phone number in return. She was nice to look at, and I felt a jolt in my loins that hadn't gotten the attention it deserved in a hell of a long time. A week later, I called her. Her name was Peggy, and she was stunning. Long blonde hair, beautiful face. We had a nice dinner, went to a movie, and I took her back to her apartment. 2 days later, I got an email from Beth. Are we in an exclusive relationship or not? What do you mean exclusive? I replied. You know exactly what it means. Only dating each other. I could feel the anger behind that letter. It sounded like some little bird had told her about Peggy. Yeah, you have a job that keeps you warm, and I thought that was enough for you. It was a cheap shot, and I realized it before I even hit the enter key. I was tired of being number 2 or maybe number 3 or 4. She didn't say anything back. I got my raise, and then another one a year later without even begging for it. I bought a house and spent most of my free time and extra money fixing it up. When Greg asked what I thought of one commercial he did, I told him I thought it sucked. He looked at it and asked why I thought that. I don't know if he agreed with me or not, but I hadn't heard about it for almost a month when he brought out another one. How was it? He asked, waiting for my answer. Well, it's better, but it looks like a cheap advertisement for a substandard builder. Greg, you're the number 2 builder in the state. Shouldn't the ad reflect that? You know, Steve, you're right. Thanks for your input. A month later, Greg walked into my office accompanied by his wife, Jill, who did the company's bookkeeping. We want you to work with the advertising people. They keep us busy with their work and keep asking us what we want. You know what we want, so we just eliminate the middleman and go to the source. I don't do advertising. I build houses. But Steve, you have a good eye for detail, layouts, and you know what we're looking for. Just consider it another part of your job. Does it come with a pay raise? I quipped at him. Let's just say you get to keep your job. How's that sound? Like I said, I'd be more than happy to help. I should have kept my mouth shut. Wear something better than jeans on Tuesday, Greg told me. We're meeting with that damn advertising company, and I don't want them to think we're a bunch of blue-collar guys. Greg, what do you care what they think? You hired them, not the other way around. But I put on a pair of Dockers anyway. Both salesmen were slick and rather arrogant, especially when they thought they knew more about our business than we did. Guys, advertising sucks. I don't know how many times we have to say that. Greg, maybe you're working with the wrong agency? That got their attention. No one wanted to lose an account these days. Wait, let's take our time. If you don't like the layout, it can be changed, no problem. Why don't we have our designer come in and talk about the details? We can give you anything you want. They were already sweating. Okay, you can invite your designer along with Steve, but this is your last attempt, Greg told the two of them. Don't worry, you won't be disappointed. I guarantee it. I wouldn't want to be that designer when the two of them get back to the office, I told Greg, grinning. It was only a shame that the rest of the day went by as easily. 2 houses didn't pass final inspection, and one needed to have the ceiling in the dining room redone. My afternoon and evening blended into one. On Wednesday, Greg got a call from the agency and set up an appointment for late Thursday night. Do you want me and my wife there? Asked Greg. That's not necessary unless you really want to. Look, after they finish the next layout, you can either approve it or find another agency. There's nothing you can do until they show you something. In retrospect, I wish I had told them to figure it out on their own, but I needed my job too badly. Wednesday was crazy. Both houses had to be re-inspected at the end of the day. It cost Greg extra money to redo a bunch of stuff, so he wasn't in a very good mood. The next crew that fails another inspection will get their damn layoffs. I'm not running a charity organization here. Like I said, Greg was a little annoyed. On Thursday, he came in all smiles. He'd either gotten a good night's sleep or he'd gotten laid. Whatever it was, I didn't care. The important thing was that his mood was better. Thursday was busy, but with all of yesterday's problems taken care of, we could relax a little. Remember, you have a meeting with that designer at 4 o'clock. I hadn't forgotten, and I certainly wasn't dressing up for them this time. Screw them, Steve. Maybe they'll give me a discount after screwing it up so many times. I was deep into my estimate work when I heard Jill's voice at my office door. Steve, there's a designer here to see you. Jill, tell him to cool his heels in the hall for a few minutes until I finish the last item, I replied, not even bothering to look up. That's going to be a little tricky. I looked up and saw Beth standing there along with Jill. And she's not a he either, Jill said with a smile. Hi, Steve, Beth said in a professional voice. Shit. Jill, why don't you get on it? Oh no. After you spent a long time talking about what the ad should look like and making my husband worry, you're going to finish this project, Jill said unequivocally. So go with her. Fix the damn ad so we can get it over with once and for all. I was totally screwed and tattooed. Steve, if you'd rather work with someone else, I'm sure the office will send another designer. Beth, I have no problem if you don't, I told her, clearing my side table so we had room to work. So why don't you lay out everything you have and we can start from there? And we spent the next 2 hours arguing about what looked good and what would work. Eventually, we came to an agreement, and I decided that everyone would be happy with it. Well, that was fun, I said sarcastically. How long will it take to redo the announcement and give Greg and Jill something to approve? Probably by the middle of next week, Beth replied, gathering her drawings and notebook. I'm glad you're doing well and that your boss trusts you so much. I've paid my dues, but I'm still learning as I go. How are things going at your job? Is everything as you envisioned? I asked, knowing I had a hidden question I didn't want to ask. It's going well. A little more work than I thought it would be, but nothing I can't handle. I'm sure it is, I said under my breath, but too loudly for Beth to hear. And what does that mean? She asked, in a tone I didn't miss. You know what I mean. Was it worth what you gave up? I didn't give up on us. Did you give up when you started dating that blonde? Was she good in bed? I have no idea. I never had a chance to find out. How about you, though? Does your work keep you warm at night? By now, we were exchanging barbs. Steve, all I wanted was a little time to get used to the new job, she snapped back. That was just the latest excuse. What did you have in mind for the year ahead? Were you working on a promotion and had to travel a lot? There was always another excuse why you wouldn't agree. I just got tired of waiting and always being number two. You were never number two, she said defiantly. Bullshit. You told me from day one that no one was going to interfere with your future plans, not even me. You want to know something crazy? I had this crazy idea in my head that you actually loved me. Hell, I even went out and bought a damn ring, no less. I was going to propose to you the night of your graduation, but I decided to wait for the right time. How stupid was that? I should have proposed to you that night and you would have turned me down and I could have moved on a lot sooner. I don't believe you. If you had bought the ring, you would have asked me. I know you. Come with me, I shouted, taking her hand. I led her out into the parking lot and led her to my car. Opening it, I reached inside and pulled a piece of nylon fishing line out of the rearview mirror. It had a ring attached to it. What the hell does this look like? I'm not lying like some people I know. I put the ring in her hands. I don't know what I expected from my little grandstanding. I'd looked at that ring a million times, and even though my mom kept telling me to take it off, it reminded me of happier times. Why don't you keep it? I don't need it anymore, and besides, I'm getting tired of the sight of it. Beth couldn't take her eyes off the ring and then off me. I didn't know. You didn't have to, that was the plan. And that's why you started dating Peggy? Asked Beth, scooting closer. One date, one goddamn date, that's our history with her. But you and I were supposed to be exclusive. Beth, I was. You weren't. You were in love with the dream of how your life was supposed to turn out. First a great career, then a loving husband. And after that, I have no idea. Like I said, I'm tired of being number two in your life. I finally said what I should have said a long time ago. Did I still care about her? Yes, but I had come to terms with her, though not fast enough, especially after today's meeting. So why don't you get your stuff and go back to your ever-loving job and give my boss what he wants? It would be a shame if you couldn't do that after all the time you've spent on your career. I left her standing still and started walking back to my office. A few minutes later, Beth came back to get her things. She didn't say a word, just gathered her things and left. Shortly after that, I left and drove off, knowing that I had finally closed this chapter in my life. Did you rake it in? Asked Greg the next morning. You could say that. The ad should be ready by the end of next week at the latest. I think you're going to like it. Good. I'm glad that's been taken care of. Have you made the new figures yet? He asked. It was clear that the party was over and I was going back to work. I didn't hear anything until mid-afternoon Wednesday. Steve, I finished the layout. When can we get together and approve it? Bring it in late Thursday and I'll invite Greg and Jill. Hopefully it will be what we talked about. Don't worry, I can guarantee they'll be quite pleased. Beth arrived shortly after 4 o'clock Thursday. We'd had a semi-normal day, so Greg was in a semi-decent mood. And Jill? Well, she was always in a good mood. The layout looked bloody great. Those were Greg's words, not mine. He and Jill were more than pleased. I could tell by the huge grins on their faces. See? I told you Steve knows what he wants, Greg said, looking at Beth. I guess I should have listened sooner, she replied quietly, gathering her things as Greg and Jill said goodbye and left us alone. You did a great job. Everything looks even better than I thought it would, I said, complimenting Beth on her work. And that's when I saw her. I don't know if she knew I saw it, but her look told me everything. I started to say something, but stopped, unable to get a word out. You gave it to me, remember? Even if it wasn't given in the same spirit it was bought in, it still means a lot to me, she said, looking at the ring on her left hand. The girls at work kept asking if I was engaged, and all I could tell them was that I should have been engaged. But I wasn't. I wasn't. What the hell was I going to say now I wanted the ring back? I'm sorry, Beth. I wasn't implying anything. I was just wondering why, especially after all this time. Heck, you're probably already with someone else, so I just can't understand why you want to wear it. I babbled and made absolutely no sense. Steve, I'm not dating anyone. Other than business lunches and dinners, I haven't gone on a single date since we broke up. What the hell am I doing? This wasn't a conversation I was going to have with her now or ever, but somehow we found ourselves knee-deep in it. Look, I'm sorry I'm all over this. Keep the ring and maybe you can use the stone to give yourself half of the diamond earrings. No, I think I'll leave it as it is. With those words, she gathered up the rest of her things and was out the door, before I could say anything more than a simple goodbye. I guess it's for the best, I said to myself, not even wanting to believe it. It was 10 to 12 when Beth walked into my office on Friday. She put down the bag she was carrying without even bothering to look at me. No one even thought to let me know she was here. I was about to ask her something about the layout when she started shifting papers on my side table, apparently making room for everything she had. She pulled out 2 Big Macs, a large and a small portion of fries, napkins, and 2 soft drinks. Okay, I was shocked. Sorry, that's not very elegant, but it was a last-minute thing. I started to say something, but was silenced when she said to me, smiling, "You still need to eat, don't you?" Touché, I thought to myself. I don't think either of us kept our eyes on each other throughout lunch. We'd spent the whole weekend together. Had we made love to each other all weekend? Absolutely not. We did, however, drink 2 bottles of wine at my house and talked all night. Friday and most of Saturday. By Sunday morning, we were making out, and by the next weekend, we were a couple again. But this time it was very different. Quality time is what we focused on. We both agreed not to schedule anything on Saturday or Sunday without consulting each other first. We realized that with our jobs, we were both bound to have things to do, but it was an unspoken courtesy to each other. We tried to put each other first going forward. We had 3 months of happiness. Did we fight? Yes, but instead of bumping like we used to, we sat down, talked, and listened to each other. It was at this point that I realized we were a real loving and caring couple, not just 2 people dating each other. Both of our parents said we should have gotten married a long time ago, her parents more so than mine. I think they were anxious to be empty nesters, and were talking about the media room they were going to set up in one of the bedrooms when it became available. 2 weeks later, Beth moved in with me. My days of being a carefree bachelor were now almost over, though nothing much had really changed. All of our friends were happy for us, and the wedding was simple, just immediate family and a few close friends. Brian was my best man, and Beth's older married sister, Sarah, was the matron of honor. We wrote our own vows. She removed the word submit, and I added the words lover and equal partner. We were 2 steps away from happiness. I wanted to go on a cruise, and Beth wanted to go to the mountains for our honeymoon, so we compromised. We stayed at a cabin on a lake in the Smoky Mountains. The lodge had 10 isolated cabins on 20 wooded acres, and best of all, it had a restaurant that brought food right to the cabin. I was getting water, I didn't have to cook, and Beth was getting her mountains. We were both happy. Heck, for the first 3 days, we didn't leave the cabin at all. Even though we thought we had discussed everything we could, new issues kept coming up. We pooled our money, and Beth was in charge of paying the bills. I took care of the house and yard, and she took care of the inner workings. The first one home would start dinner, and although we tried to plan meals for the week, more often than not, one or the other would change the menu. These were all Mickey Mouse-related little things. The bigger issues came 4 years later. We both had stressful jobs. Stress and tight deadlines were the norm rather than the exception. A glass of wine or a neck or foot massage helped most of the time, but not all. Sometimes you just needed to be an umbrella and someone to talk to. We couldn't solve each other's problems, but we could listen, keep our mouths shut, and keep our comments to ourselves. After that, a kiss and a hug was all that was needed. We were in love, and that said it all. "I think I want a baby," Beth began over dinner one night. "I think it's time for us to move on to the next level, and I sure as hell don't want to be changing diapers when I'm in my 30s. I thought about kids, but I wasn't sure we were ready. Hell, and would we ever be 100% ready? So we started trying. Since Beth wasn't on the pill, we figured she'd get pregnant the first month. She was approaching 30 and was a little worried when nothing happened in the 4th month. She was trying to get everything done before she got pregnant and had the baby. It was the doctor who advised her to take it easy. "Beth, relax. You're overloading yourself. That's probably why nothing is happening. You're both young and fertile, so there's no physical reason why you can't get pregnant. Why don't you 2 take a couple of days off, relax, and take it easy? You'd be surprised what stress can do to a person's body." We took his advice and gave ourselves a 4-day weekend. Instead of just sitting at home and waiting for things to happen, we went on a cruise for a long weekend. We didn't care where we went. We just needed to get away. Our cell phones were left in the car, and we told everyone that unless the world was ending, We were not to be contacted. God, it was a great weekend. Now I wish we had taken a cruise for our honeymoon, Beth said after the first day. I could get used to it, although they'd probably need a wheelbarrow to get me off the ship after 7 days of nonstop eating. She laughed, but she was right. There were literally 24 hours a day to eat aboard the ship. There was always something being served somewhere, and if not, you could always order room service food. So we ate all over the ship and made love morning, noon, and night. On our last night on board, we went to the midnight buffet and walked around the ship for an hour before returning to our cabin to pack. Something must have worked that weekend because the first and then the second test kit said the same thing. Beth is pregnant. And I guess every woman's pregnancy plays out differently, but the golden glow of motherhood never came. Morning sickness, cramps, food cravings, emotional swings, and those were just my symptoms. Beth's were much worse. We prepped the nursery and procrastinated until the blessed day, or should I say, when the baby finally decided she wanted to leave her temporary home. Beth hadn't gained much weight, but was uncomfortable nonetheless. In the 7th month, we switched cars because mine was bigger and much more spacious. By the end of the 8th month, she just wanted to be done with it. She said she felt like a whale. To me, she still looked good. Linda Rebecca Moore was born at 4:45 in the morning after a night of intense labor. I was in the delivery room holding Beth's hand the whole time. Of course, I still have her fingerprints on my left forearm and probably will for the rest of my life, but it was worth it. Linda weighed 6 pounds 5 ounces and was beautiful even after 12 hours of labor. She had dark hair, her mom's bright brown eyes, and a little pug nose. Even though our moms wanted to be nannies, after 4 months we found a nanny to watch Linda while we were at work. Now we had a very different life, and after the initial problems we made a plan and stuck to it. Life for the three of us was good. My responsibilities expanded, and Beth gave up all her traveling for the next 2 years. Our first disagreement came when I decided it was time to buy a bigger house. With 2 bedrooms and 1 bath, we had already outgrown our modest abode. I was eyeing something very nice and modern. Greg said he'd give us a great price on a new house, but Beth thought we'd be better off choosing something a couple years older and saving money. We can always build a house later, she said, finally convincing me. After living in the new house for less than 2 months, I came home Friday night and found it nearly empty. Beth said to take a shower. She had plans for the evening. I wasn't too happy about it, but we did it anyway. Apparently, we were the luckiest couple on earth because this time we got it right on the first try. Not that I couldn't have another weekend like that. For some reason, her pregnancy went much easier this time around. Maybe she knew what to expect. But whatever the case, 9 months later, Megan Marie came into our family. Like Linda, Megan was beautiful and was the best baby anyone could ever dream of. Are you sure about this? Asked Beth, waiting for me at the clinic. We can try again to have a boy if you want. No, I have my 2 girls and I'm happy. A son would be nice though, but don't worry, I'll make them both boys. An hour later, I had surgery. My childbearing days were over. The next 6 years were wonderful, at least from my perspective. Instead of giving me a raise, Greg gave me stock in his company. We weren't both tight with money since we both had good jobs, but other little things seemed to nag one or the other. First of all, Beth wasn't getting promoted in her company as she had hoped. For the first couple years, while our children were young, she refused to travel and refused promotions that required long business trips. She did it for us, the family, but at the same time, she wasn't too happy about it. That's when I started breaking the weekend rule. Don't plan anything without everyone else's consent. I didn't do it often at first, but as I started doing it more and more often, it started to annoy us. I think after the 10th or 12th time, Beth started doing it herself. After that, we both started doing different things on Saturdays and Sundays. At first, I didn't see this as a problem, but as time went on, it became another issue between us. Steve, I've been offered a promotion and I'm probably going to take it. Our conversation began as we were cleaning up after dinner. I think if I turn it down this time, they'll never offer me this position or any other position again. I'll have to do some traveling, but it will be minimal. No problem. The girls aren't babies anymore, and one way or another, we'll all survive. I said, babbling on with no idea how this would affect our daily lives. But damn, she deserved it, didn't she? At first, she didn't just have to travel. She had to meet a whole new group of clients. Instead of being only local, the new clients were multinational and sometimes had marketing offices in multiple locations. After the first 3 months, we were all on edge. Sometimes Beth would leave on Monday morning, and we wouldn't see her until Friday night. We communicated on the phone, but it wasn't the same. In the months that followed, the trips became less frequent, but she was always gone at least one night a week. She was tense, but she also had a look of satisfaction on her face. "I made it," she said, glowing and kissing me soundly as she ran through the door and threw herself into my arms. "They liked my layout and asked me to come up with one for the new line coming out after the first of the month," she said, kissing me again. "Isn't that wonderful?" "I knew you could do it. Why don't you sit down and have a glass of wine and tell me all about it while I finish making dinner?" So she did, telling me everything in great detail. I was interested, but it didn't matter to me as much as it did to her. I can't say it was in one ear and out the other, but I didn't pry the details out of her. I had my own problems every day, and I tried not to burden Beth with them. So over time, it started to feel like we no longer talked store when we got home and only dealt with issues that directly affected our little family unit, which turned out to be a big mistake. Plaques are what they turn into, little pieces clogging the path between us. The missed dinner here, the conflicting weekends, the sidelined lovemaking, the problems with our 2 daughters, it all started to add up. When Beth missed our summer vacation due to unforeseen circumstances at work, and when I forgot our anniversary, unkind words were spoken by both of us. When we argued about whose job was more important, the gap grew wider. The good morning kiss was the first thing I noticed disappearing from our normal morning routine. When I made an effort to seek her out and kiss her before leaving the house, it felt like an imposition rather than something to look forward to. As I said, resentments and disappointments accumulated like plaques in an artery, imperceptibly drowning out the intimacy, the life force of our marriage. Little nibbles and jabs became almost daily, and no matter what we did, it didn't get better. "Honey, we need to talk," I said, sitting up in bed and waiting for her. She was going out of town tomorrow, and something she had told me to do hadn't been done, which had caused a small argument earlier in the evening. "I thought we already talked about this tonight," she said, a little too sarcastic for my taste. "I did apologize," I replied in an apologetic tone. "Beth, it seems like we fight all the time, and over the stupidest things." "Steve, you're the one who usually starts it, not me," she said defiantly. "You know what I mean? We don't talk anymore." I pointed this out to her. "We go from question to question until one of us takes offense, and then we start arguing about it. It's pointless." Beth had her own point of view. "I used to try to tell you how my day went, but you weren't interested. You stopped talking to me about your day, too. It was like we had nothing to talk about except what was going on here, and it always led to an argument or fight between us. So, why don't we make a pact to take 10 minutes a day with each other and talk about our day? That way we'll keep track of how the other feels and why," I suggested. "Whatever you say," Beth replied with a sigh. "You know what I mean? I make an offer and you turn it down without giving it a chance." "Okay, we'll try it when I get back from Chicago. Anything else?" "How about some alone time for the two of us?" I threw in. "Steve, in case you haven't noticed, we have 2 little girls wandering around the house at all hours of the day and night. As soon as we close and lock the door, they want to know what we're doing here. Do you want to explain that to them? How about we go away together? My mom will watch the girls and you and I can sneak away, distract ourselves, and reconnect. You know, like we used to do before we had kids. That could work. We can leave our cell phones and computers and stuff like that in the car. We'll set up and just do it." She smiled for the first time in a long time. When I called the next morning and made an appointment for the following weekend, I probably should have cleared the date with Beth first, but she told me to set it up. I was still feeling the aftertaste from a great night of lovemaking and had just booked a room at a romantic bed and breakfast. "Steve, I can't go this coming weekend. Carl and I plan to work late Friday night and, if necessary, Saturday morning to finish the project. Look, we'll probably finish on Friday, but I can't be sure. You better ask me before you make all these plans." She was right, but I wasn't too happy about it. Carl, Carl, Carl. I was sick to death of hearing her boss's name. I pouted like a silly little kid, which led to another argument about how important her job was to her and how people counted on her, even if I didn't think so. You know, men really are stupid sometimes. When we stopped arguing, I took it as a good sign. Heck, our relationship must be getting better. Because although we didn't talk more or less, we didn't argue anymore. It wasn't until much later that I found out this was a bad thing. Beth seemed to have given up in a way, deciding that it made sense. She wasn't accomplishing anything by arguing with me, so she just stopped. As time went on, the gulf between us grew wider and wider, and one night I tried to remember how long it had been since we'd made love and couldn't remember. It was like getting hit in the face with a shovel. When I asked her if she wanted to fool around that night, the look I got wasn't priceless. It was like I'd just asked her for one of her kidneys. I'm not in the mood tonight. How about I give you a reprieve? I didn't fight back. Steve, I'm tired and just want to get some sleep if you don't mind. But I didn't mind. For heaven's sake, please leave me alone, she yelled at me. Damn, where did that come from? I thought to myself, standing there with my mouth open, but I wasn't going to wait for another lunge. I looked at her, grabbed my pillow, and headed for the exit. Steve, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, she said, but it was too late. I was already crossing the hall, closing and even locking the damn guest bedroom door. Steve, let me in. I'm sorry, please, let me in. It wasn't happening. You can say a lot of things to a guy, but when you reject his advances and basically tell him to go screw himself, it's a low blow. I never got any sleep that night. Thursday morning was cool for mid-July both outside and inside the house. Beth apologized for her words, but added that I should have left her alone after the second time she asked me to back off. Don't worry, Beth. I'll leave you alone if that's what you want. What do you mean, if that's what I want? Followed her immediate reply. Take it any way you like. Nah. And what are you going to do, sulk? She asked in a condescending tone. I quickly replied, screw you, and got the hell out of there. My teams paid the price for Beth's comments. Even though they only messed up a few little things, I pounced on them with both feet. The only problem was that I ended up apologizing to them all, even after they told me to go screw myself or sleep with them before I got to work tomorrow morning. I knew that wasn't going to happen. I got home early and had dinner ready by 5:30. I waited until 6 and then the girls and I started eating. Beth came running in at 6:38 as we were clearing the table and putting the dishes in the dishwasher. You weren't expecting me for dinner? Why? I didn't know how late you'd be, so we waited for the food to get cold and then ate without you. You know, we have a microwave, she spat out after me. You know, you have a house and a family, I answered her. There's leftovers in the fridge, I said as I walked out of the kitchen. I'll make my own damn dinner. Suit yourself. I knew she'd be pissed, and normally I would have waited for her with dinner, but tonight I wanted to prove a point. Stupid, but stupid nonetheless. I was sitting on the bed in the guest room, going over the application on my laptop, when I noticed Beth in the doorway. Are you done sulking yet, or are you going to keep making me pay for not letting you have fun last night? You really don't get it, do you? Can't you see what's happened to us, or don't you care anymore? When was the last time we spoke to each other civilly or even had a conversation without one or the other of us taking a jab at the other or making a cheap jab that ended in an argument? I asked, looking at a confused Beth. You started it yourself by reacting to me being tired last night. Forget it, I give up, said I, going back to my bet and trying to ignore her. So, are you going to sleep here now? She asked in a tone that said she was eager for a fight. Didn't you ask me to leave you alone? Now, I'm doing exactly what you asked, nothing more and nothing less. Good. Maybe now I can sleep at night without someone spitting on me. Now I was hot. Well, you can't talk about me, it must be your new boyfriend, I said, getting up and closing the door in her face. Stephen Moore, open this door immediately, she yelled, hitting it with her fist. How dare you accuse me of treason? Open this door immediately. She started kicking at it. I didn't open the door, but she was persistent. Beth came back 3 times that night to see if I had unlocked the door. I didn't open it. I wasn't a fool, and I wasn't anymore. The next morning I tried to sneak out, but she was already up and waiting for me. Do you really expect me to believe that you really think I'm cheating on you? Where the hell did you get that brainless idea? Steve, sometimes I can't figure out what's on your mind. At least I know you don't care, so that's a big relief. Why don't you go out of town for a while and give us both a break? You can tell your good buddy Carl what a horse's ass I am, and then he can tell you what a saint you are for putting up with me. Short, direct, and straight for the jugular. You really are an ass, you know that? Yeah, and at least yours isn't anytime soon, I said as I walked out the door and into the garage. She followed me to my car. I got in it, closed the door, started the car, and left her standing there in her fluffy pink robe. Not 2 minutes later, Beth was already calling my cell phone. I had nothing more to say to her. Steve was right. I had talked to Carl about my marriage. I should say that we both talked to each other about our marriages. Carl was married to a real bitch who didn't work and did nothing but spend his money. Carl would go on any trip out of town just to avoid coming home and being with her, as he put it. He would tell me how lucky I was to have such a wonderful husband and family. And that I don't know why Steve thought something was going on with Carl, as he was always the perfect gentleman. He would open the door for me, buy me lunch when we were out of town, and did everything he could to teach me how to deal with demanding customers, which most of them were. When Steve and I had problems, Carl always gave me suggestions on how to solve them. He advised me to negotiate from a position of strength, so I wouldn't have to settle for less than I wanted or deserved. And believe it or not, things usually worked out exactly as he said. Steve was used to me traveling and working late. When he started playing golf on Saturdays, I did my own thing. No one else was going to dictate to me. My success grew along with Carl's. When he got a bonus, I got a bonus. When he took on a new client, we'd both go out of town to meet him. We were a team. And I knew there were problems at home, but don't all marriages have rough patches? I was always busy and stressed about the crazy demands of my clients. Nothing was ever good enough for them. I couldn't understand why Steve didn't understand, and wouldn't back down until I calmed down. Probably because I never talked to him about it. Hell, we never talked about anything at all. No, we were a team in the beginning, especially after Linda was born. What happened? I know we each had our own work problems, but now we were dealing with them alone. Perhaps each of us thought the other wouldn't understand. At least that's what I thought. And I knew that if Steve couldn't understand what I was facing at work, Carl could. He was there for me through it all and knew exactly what it took to get the job done. If I needed to stay late at work, he was by my side every step of the way, suggesting ideas we could try. He became not just my boss, but my good friend. When he and his wife separated, we talked for hours. He told me that my husband's job was to support me, not try to lead me astray. Last week was frustrating, to say the least. We had to redo an ad that was rejected by a client, and Carl was upset because his wife filed divorce papers. I was stressed to the max, and Steve wanted to fool around and wouldn't take no for an answer. I lost my temper and lashed out at him. I wasn't actually angry at him, but at the whole situation I was in. I felt like I was being pulled in all directions. Work, Steve, the kids. I was at my breaking point. Then Steve and I had a big fight, and for the first time in our marriage, when I wasn't on a business trip, he didn't stay the night with me. I was wrong and tried to tell him so, but the next morning he still wasn't in the best mood and we started fighting again. Everything was cracking at the seams and I felt like my brain was going to explode. When I eventually got to work, I was sitting at my desk and I was just at a loss for words. Carl, I need to take a vacation day, sick day, or a damn personal day today, I said, with my eyes wet with tears. Beth, are you okay? No, I'm not okay. I started as tears started to roll down my cheeks. Standing up, Carl pulled me into his office and closed the door, sitting me down on the seat in front of his desk, looking for a box of tissues he had somewhere in his office. Here, he said, holding out 2 napkins to me. Sorry, Carl, I just snapped. Steve and I had a big fight last night and this morning. I said some nasty things to him and I don't even know why. I guess he deserved it. Doesn't he realize that you basically run the household, not to mention the work you do here? He just doesn't appreciate you like the rest of us do, he said as he hugged me. It would be the right thing to do if you kicked him out. Carl, I don't want him to leave. I just want things to go back to when we were happy. Trust me, when a marriage starts to deteriorate like yours, there's no going back. If he doesn't want to do things your way, screw him. You have to take care of yourself because no one else will. I looked at Carl looming over me and realized one thing. I needed to get out of there. Carl, I'll be back tomorrow. There's nothing so hot on my desk that it can't wait 24 hours. I'll see you in the morning. He was still saying something when I got up and headed for the door. Remember, don't let it sway you. Be steadfast. With those words, I walked out of the building and headed towards the house. Next chapter. "Snap! If you piss off any more of my team, I'm going to kick your ass, you hear me?" demanded Jill, entering my office with a huge mug of coffee in hand. "I'm serious. You've been a bear around here for the last 2 weeks, and I don't need to deal with another Greg. With Greg, I can give him some and he'll be happy as a lark. And with you, well, I'm not giving you anything, but I might have to call Beth and have her poke your eyes out or something," she said with a smile. And I wasn't smiling at all. "Okay, I'll back off a little." "A lot," she snapped back. "Are you having trouble with Ms.? Seems to be okay lately." I tossed the ruler aside. "It's just that there's no way we're getting along lately and we're always fighting about something. Steve, you both work full-time and you both face deadlines every week. I know it's hard, but you two need to leave your work at work when you close your office doors. Taking it home with you is not good for either of you. Hell, when Greg freaks out, I just remind him that we're together, and if he wants to go alone, let him let me know. You may think he's hard-headed, but he really isn't, at least not with me. We built this company together, but we both know what's really important. So when it comes to us or this company, we choose ourselves first. Maybe I'll buy a dozen roses and a fancy card on the way home tonight. Then what are you going to do tomorrow? Candy, jewelry? What about the next day and the day after that? Steve, you can't buy your way into her heart. Greg tried to do it years ago after a terrible fight, and I told him he didn't have that much money. One rose and a little note is a good start, but only a start. For the next 12 days, bring her one rose and a personal note each. No matter how serious a fight you have, this should melt the ice. If it doesn't, then you have bigger problems than the two of you can handle together." She was right. What did I have to lose? I spent the last whore of the day agonizing, trying to think of some cute phrase, but they all sounded trite, like stupid cliches. In the end, I just wrote one line and headed for home, stopping at a flower store 4 blocks away. Her car was in the garage and dinner was already ready on the table when I walked into the kitchen. When our gazes met, I wasn't sure which Beth would be greeting me tonight. The kids were in the kitchen, asking who the flower was for, grabbing a flower and a small card. "Girls, give Daddy a little break and go wash the dishes for dinner," Beth said, keeping her eyes on me. It only took 5 steps to bridge the gap between us. I handed her the rose, kissed her gently on the lips, and murmured, "I'm sorry." When she put her arms around my neck, the floodgates opened and we just stood in the middle of the kitchen, embracing each other. "Mommy, why are you crying?" asked Megan, standing up and looking at the two of us. "I'm just so happy, that's all." "Grown people do this all the time," Linda told her sister, sitting down at the kitchen table. "Let me get rid of my briefcase and I'll be right down," I said to Beth, pulling her head away from my wet shoulder. With a glance at the rose, she opened the card. The card read, "You mean the world to me." Tears came to her eyes again. "So, how are my girls today?" "Did you two have any trouble today?" I asked, going back into the kitchen and laying out the food. "Megan didn't make her bed this morning, but I did," said a glowing Linda, while Megan stuck her tongue out at her chatterbox sister. "Well, maybe you should have helped her. After all, you're her big sister, aren't you?" "Yes, yeah, you should have helped me," Megan put in with a smug look. "I think you both need to help. You know your mom works really hard and needs our help." "Mom, I can make cereal for breakfast," Linda said, shoving a huge piece of roast into her mouth. "I think I can handle breakfast, but thanks anyway," she said, still looking at me. We didn't exchange a single word at dinner. The kids filled the void with talk about what we should do over the weekend. After dinner, we all watched Pirates of the Caribbean together in the living room. When the movie was over, with minimal games and tickling, I carried the 2 bundles up the stairs to their room, one under each arm. I couldn't do that for long because the girls were getting older and heavier. I struggled to get up the stairs. When the girls were in their pajamas, I kissed each one and told them that Mommy would be here soon to put them to bed. I guess a couple more tickles wouldn't hurt. I woke them up again as they hid under the covers to hide from me. "2 wild girls are waiting for you upstairs," I said to my wife, as I passed her on the stairs heading for the kitchen. I finished up in the kitchen and gathered my things for Thursday's meeting. Did I have any plans for the evening, especially where I was going to sleep? Not really, but I wasn't going to start in the guest room like I did last night. I might end up there, but I wasn't about to leave my own bedroom without a fight. Fight was the key word. Beth was still in the girls' room reading them a story when I walked by and peeked in on my way to our bedroom. I laid out my clothes for tomorrow and slipped into the shower to wash off the sweat and grime. How could we let things get out of hand? I couldn't blame it all on Beth because, in reality, I was just as much to blame as she was. I guess when you don't talk, you can't solve your problems. Well, I wasn't going to keep quiet anymore. Let me make her angry. Let her yell at me. But it would at least be a start. She was already in bed when I walked into our bedroom. I'm not having an affair, you have to believe that. I would never do that to you, Beth said, waiting for my reaction. I looked at her, threw off my towel, and put on the shorts I usually slept in. I didn't really think you were like that, but I wouldn't put my life on the line. Crazier things have happened to married couples. And who, may I ask, was I supposed to have this supposed affair with? Well, the name Carl comes to mind, and beyond that I don't know. At this point, I decided not to go to bed with her just yet. Carl, my boss? Steve, he's 10 years older than me and married. I thought you said he was getting a divorce. Yes, he's getting a divorce, but he's still married now. Did you think I was cheating on you with a married man? You must have a really low opinion of me right now. What about the letter carrier or our parish priest? Why didn't you ask me about that right away? Now she began to raise her voice a little. Think about it from my point of view. We stopped arguing because we stopped talking about something important. You practically cut me off from my sex life. And for the last 2 months when you were out of town with Carl, you didn't even bother to call me at night. You can't imagine what was going through my head. Your fingers weren't broken, and you could have called me to see if I was in my room at night or sleeping with Carl, she said, putting emphasis on his name. I thought about it a couple times, but if I called and you weren't there, I'd probably freak out and do something stupid. And then, finding out I was wrong, I'd probably mess things up between us even more. So I was just waiting for you to say something, I explained to her. Look, you waited for me, and I waited for you. And we've been drifting further and further apart, undecided. I don't love Carl, I love you. He's just a good friend, that's all. He was just someone to talk to when you and I weren't talking. So instead of talking to me, you talked to your good buddy Carl? And what did you tell him? Everything? Did you tell him we weren't doing this anymore? Did you tell him that I asked you to back off when you climbed up on your high horse? Did he tell you that I was an ass and that you could do no wrong? When did all of this take place? Over intimate dinners and drinks? My voice cracked and got louder with each question I showered her with. Was she really discussing the details of our marriage with her new friend and even her boss? It wasn't like that. I didn't tell him everything. I looked at her when she said that. Her eyes told me she was lying. She probably told him a lot more than she should have. Jesus, Beth, how could you? Steve, please keep your voice down. The girls will hear you. What were those great words of wisdom he told you? It must have been something really impressive since he didn't even have the strength to save his own marriage. What did you tell him? That our marriage is in the toilet and you have your hand on the lever. I bet he told you to flush it, didn't he? I didn't even have to wait for an answer. It was all written on her face. What was next? He was going to comfort you and maybe the two of you could ride off into the sunset? I can't believe you were that naive. Or were you just that unhappy in our marriage? The fact that she had opened up about our life and marriage was bad enough, but the fact that it was done in front of her damn boss made it even more humiliating for me. Predator was the first word that came to my mind. Look, I know we have problems to work through, but what advice can someone in an unhappy marriage give you? We need to work on our problems on our own, not when we're both tired and stressed, I told her. She looked at me. I suggest that we set aside time this weekend for the two of us to discuss our problems. You write down your problems and I'll write down mine. Maybe with a clear head we can come up with some good ideas. But no more third parties, I insisted. Nah, I'll tell Mom we'll keep the kids for the day on Saturday. She won't mind. Steve, you have to remember that I love you. Okay, that's over with. We both need a good night's sleep. I know I do. And in my own bed. That at least brought a smile to Beth's face. We kissed and hugged and snuggled against each other until we fell asleep. We can do this, I thought to myself as I headed off to work on Friday. I know we can. Well, said Jill, standing in the doorway with a cup of coffee in her hand. What? I gave her a rose, but we still have a long way to go. Steve, I didn't say one rose would solve all your problems. All she had to do was relieve the tension. She did, but we're still screwed. Well, when you bring another one tonight, she'll see you're serious. And after the 10th one, she'll see you're not giving up. It's a small gesture, but a nice visual. Remember, the card is the most important thing. I thanked her again and warned her not to slack off on the cruise. On Friday, when Greg stammered about Saturday, I informed him that there was no chance of me being in the office tomorrow. I have something planned with Beth, and that can't be changed. He wrinkled his nose and groaned, as he always did. I could hear him grumbling all the way down the hall until he closed his office door. My marriage was worth more to me than a few hours of overtime working on a project that didn't need to be finished until Wednesday. I was stuck again on what to write on the card. I love you wasn't a good fit because it was already too cloying a phrase. I needed something that would make her think about us. I smiled as I came up with the perfect phrase. Next chapter. I hope you gave him hell last night, Carl began. He went on to say, I guarantee he doesn't know how good he has it with you. We're working on our problems, but right now I need to focus on work and finishing the Kemp Foods layout, I said, hoping Carl would take the hint. Well, let me know if you get stuck. I'll be in my office if you need to talk, he said as he walked away. Thank God, I whispered to myself as I walked back to the layout. When Carl offered me lunch, I told him I had brought my own lunch and would work at my desk. By 4:30, my layout was almost done. I compared the last 3 ads I had done, and this turned out to be the best of the 4. I printed out all 4 and stuck them on my bulletin board. I was taking notes when Carl walked in. What do you think? I asked Carl, watching him study them all. The color is a little muted, and I'd probably choose a different shade of blue, but it's still not bad. I think they'll be quite happy with it. Carl turned and looked at me. Any plans for the weekend? Sunday we're getting together as a family. On Saturday, Steve and I plan to have some alone time. I told him everything briefly, no details. Just remember what I told you, he said, handing me a piece of paper. If it gets too stressful, you can call me on my cell phone and I'll come and get you. I don't think that will be necessary. You never know. My wife and I got into some real fights and she even tried to change my face with a lamp and a cutting board. Now the bitch is doing everything she can to get a grip on our savings. She's even making an attempt on my damn 401k. I should have dumped her years ago. Well, Steve and I aren't even close to that. We just have a few issues we need to discuss and work out this weekend, I replied, putting all my stuff away and getting ready to leave. Don't be too sure. I thought the same thing 6 months ago and now look what I got, Carl said, trying to stretch their conversation. Steve still loves me, and I know we can work through even the toughest problems. Carl looked at me like he was about to say something, but stopped before he could open his mouth. I have to go now. Have a great weekend, he finally said, almost running out of my office. Carl is getting weirder by the day, I thought to myself. But I don't know if I'd be able to hold it together if Steve and I were getting a divorce. I grabbed only my purse. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't taking any work with me for the weekend. We needed to spend this weekend with no one to distract us. We can only hope Steve didn't have anything planned. Next chapter. I left the blueprints on the table and headed for the exit. Have a good weekend, Jill, I said as I passed her office. Remember what I told you, and for goodness sake, leave your temper at the door. Do you hear me? She sounded like she was scolding one of her children. I hear you, but I need to get my ass in order and get to the flower store before it closes. I waved her off and walked out the door, running to my car. I picked up my rose, bought 2 bottles of wine and 6 bottles of Corona. I had no idea what we were having for dinner tonight, but I bought a French silk pie for dessert. I was going to do my best to make this weekend perfect. I spent the last 10 minutes of the drive going over my list of problems. There were only 5, and they weren't really problems, more like suggestions. I didn't want to appear confrontational, but I needed to get my thoughts to Beth somehow. Daddy's home, my girls shouted at the full capacity of their lungs. And he brought us a flower again, Megan said, trying to get a hold of it as I laid all the things I'd bought out on the counter. Honey, it's for Mommy. Why don't you give it to her for me? I held out the rose to my daughter. Mommy, this is for you, she said, running up to her mother, who was standing at the sink watching the commotion. You bought this for me? Daddy bought it. I don't have any money. Beth kissed the top of her head. Beth sniffed the rose. It was sweet and would be even more fragrant when fully opened. She cut off the end of the stem and placed it in the same vase as yesterday's. Afterward, she opened the little white card. If it's going to be a boy, I think we should name him David, was all it said. She smiled. Memories of that first night we met came to mind. We had come a long way in one aspect, but we were at a crossroads and needed to resolve some issues in order to move on with our lives. We can do that, she whispered, tucking the card and envelope into her back pocket. Honey, I'm going to go change. Give me 10 minutes and we can have dinner. A hot dish of tuna noodles with potato chips sprinkled on top was a quick and easy dinner. I wasn't a big fan of casseroles, but this dish could have been made the night before and we would have had 2 dinners, not to mention the kids loved it. I watched her and myself throughout dinner. I had to threaten the kids twice that if they didn't clear their plates, there would be no pie for dessert. All through dinner, they looked longingly at the rich chocolate pie staring back at them from the counter. Beth walked over to the counter where I stood, preparing to cut the pie, and whispered quietly to me, "Don't give them a big piece or you'll have to soothe them with too much sugar." I heeded her warning, cutting the girls each a small piece of pie. And don't mention that they'll be spending time with my parents tomorrow, or we'll never get them to bed tonight. She was right about that. By 9 o'clock, the dishes were put away and the kids were in their beds hoping to fall asleep. Beth and I sat in the kitchen drinking wine. "How was your week?" I asked in a concerned voice, starting our evening. "As hectic as always. Sometimes I wish we'd win the lottery and say to hell with everything and everyone, but since that's not going to happen, we'll have to learn to live with it. Why don't you go back to working the inside accounts? Then you wouldn't look stressed out all the time." "Steve, this job is the lowest on the totem pole. It's a damn entry-level position. The only reason I did it before was because the girls were young and out of school. This is what I went to school for. What I've been preparing my whole life for. I can't just pick it up and quit because it's a bit difficult or stressful," Beth said, starting to get worried. I noticed her blood pressure was starting to rise. "I'm not saying to quit. I'm just wondering what it's worth." "There is stress in your job and I'm not telling you to quit," replied Beth. "I'm not saying quit, but there has to be something less stressful." "Yeah, if I want to be a damn secretary, you know yourself that everyone wants everything yesterday and at half price. We'll just have to learn to deal with it without killing each other." "We better, because what we're doing now doesn't suit either of us. Let's start by comparing notes. Maybe that will give us some insight." I didn't know how right I would be. I pulled out my list, and Beth pulled hers out of her purse. We exchanged lists. She had a list of 10 items, but only 5 pertained to her job. More help around the house, being more consistent with the girls, leaving her alone for a while so she could calm down, not requiring her to entertain herself every night, and going out every other week as a couple. The questions about work were almost exactly the same as mine. Work stress was top of mind for both of us. She wanted to make sure I respected the fact that her job was just as important as mine. Most of the issues were the same ones we'd been arguing about for the last couple years. "Steve, I don't discuss our problems with everyone," came a sharp criticism of one of the items on my list. "Who else do you discuss our problems with besides Carl? With your sister, and please don't talk to me about your mother," I almost pleaded this time. "With no one," was her immediate reply. "Why don't I believe you, Beth? You've already told me that you discussed our marital problems with Carl, a stranger. Are you telling me you haven't said a word to anyone else? Did you and Carl compare notes to see who had the most broken marriage? I have to say I'm glad Carl won that contest." "That's true, but Carl isn't a stranger." "Okay, Beth, who is Carl? Pray tell." "He's my boss and a good friend." I immediately felt uneasy. "A friend with benefits?" "What benefits?" replied Beth. "You know exactly what I mean," I said, in perhaps too loud a voice. "I'm not sleeping with Carl for heaven's sake. I never have, and I'm not going to, so get that into your damn thick skull. Do you hear me?" she replied, her eyes burning 2 holes in my skull. "Okay, where do we start?" She pulled out a pen and pencil and started taking notes. Half an hour to cool down after we got home, 10 minutes to discuss the problems we'd encountered during the day, and no discussing our problems with anyone but the 2 of us. Meeting every 2 weeks to repair the relationship won't work. It needs to happen more often, at least from the beginning. I propose we have a date night every Wednesday. It would start after the girls go to bed and go until 10:30. We can alternate who's in charge of what. In charge? That's right. Whoever is in charge plans the evening, and the other has to go along with it. No questions asked. Well, I don't know. What if it's something really weird? I looked at her. Well, how do I know what you might want to do with a free pass? No. We'll agree that if the other person has a problem with the planned activity, they don't have to do it. In other words, you won't have to do anything you don't like. Come on, what do you have to lose and you might enjoy it? Also, no days off unless it's an emergency, and I mean exactly an emergency, not just an excuse to get distracted. There were a few more minor points about keeping in touch with a friend while traveling, and an hour and a half after we started, we were done, at least for the day. Who gets the first date night? She asked. Since it was my idea, I'll give you the first chance on Wednesday. Maybe we can finally find time to be intimate again, I said, smiling for the first time that evening. Things were good, but not as great as they had been in the past. After so many months of conflict, I think we were both a little wary. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed having my wife in my arms, let alone lying in bed with me, but we had a long way to go to repair the damage done. I made sure to give her a rose every day with a memorable phrase. On Wednesday, Beth was nervous as hell. I showed up with a white rose and a note saying that I loved her more today than I did the first night I proposed to her. Not as well as some of the others, but I tried. We had a nice dinner with the kids, after which I was told to clear the table and she would take care of the kids. A board game, some TV, and they were upstairs getting ready for bed. But before bed, we had a little fun in the bedroom. How did you like our first date night? I asked. Not bad. Not bad at all. What do you mean, not bad? Like I said, not bad, but mine will be much better. Steve, what do you have planned for next week? Sorry, you'll have to wait and see. Thus began a week of questioning about what I had planned for the two of us. The truth was that I didn't have a damn thing planned yet, but I didn't want her to know that. My note with the rose on Monday told her to get more sleep because she needed it. I didn't have a plan ready yet, but I had most of it, and the rest I was making up on my own. I dropped off my bag of overnight stuff at my mom's house. She would be picking the kids up from school Wednesday afternoon. I told her I would pick them up for school the next morning. I left work early and bought a few necessities on the way home. Using 2 bags of Hershey's Kisses, I made a heart in the center of the bed. Using red licorice, I scrawled the words, "I love you," in the center of the heart, and decorated the inside of the heart with blueberries and strawberries. Finally, I put a bottle of white Zinfandel on ice and waited for Beth to come home. Next chapter. Beth, if we stay a little longer, we can finish Thompson's proposal, Carl said at 5 minutes to 5. Can't stay tonight, Carl. Steve and I have something planned for this evening. How is your relationship with Mr. Zasrens going right now? Does he still demand you do things his way? Asked Carl with a dose of sarcasm. We've gotten a lot better. We've had long talks and set rules for each of us, and it seems to be helping. I tried to do that with my ex, but, as befits a cunt, she never followed any of them. He started to get angry again. If I were you, I'd dump him now and be done with it. He can pretend to change, but he'll still screw you in the end. Why don't you stay? We'll get this over with. And then, I'll take you out to dinner. My treat. Carl, I can't. I promised Steve I'd be on time tonight, maybe another time, I told my irritated boss. Whatever you say. Go home to your husband, but mark my word, you'll regret it. Each day working with Carl became more and more difficult. He became more and more demanding, and more than once I thought he was really hitting on me. His divorce had already been said and done. All that was left was to wait for it to be finalized. It hadn't been completely trashed, but he was furious that he'd lost something to his ex, especially when she got a piece of his 401k. Maybe he'll calm down when the case is final, I thought, because I wasn't sure how much more I could take from him. I was about half an hour late, and after leaving the office, I made a quick phone call home. That would at least give Steve an idea of when I would be home. I didn't know what he had planned for tonight, but I was looking forward to it. Last week had been fun, and tonight I knew I had no control over what was going to happen. I had butterflies fluttering in my stomach. It felt like I was going on a blind date, and even with my husband. I put the conversation with Carl out of my mind and thought of only one thing, my husband, and making this night unforgettable. Next chapter. I wasn't happy about her being late, but I wasn't about to let it ruin our evening. Instead of having dessert after dinner, tonight we would try it first. I joked to myself about buying some stupid outfit, but put the thought out of my mind. Why spend money on something I will or won't wear just once? Looking at my watch, I proceeded to put my plan into action. I lit the candles in our bedroom, opened the wine, and took a quick shower. I met Beth at the door. "Where are the kids?" was her first question. "At my parents' for the night." That brought a huge smile to her face. "You mean it's just the two of us?" she asked, hugging me. "Until the farm animals are brought in," I said, and then retracted my statement and said I was just kidding. I guess she still didn't know what I was planning. "Steve, what do you have planned for dinner? I'm starving," asked Beth, looking around the empty kitchen. "We'll talk about food later. I have other things to worry about right now." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a blindfold. When I opened the bedroom door, I realized two things. One, I had lit too many candles, just under 30, because it was so damn hot in our room. Second, I shouldn't use scented candles. The room reeked of lilacs. However, another flick of the ceiling fan solved both problems. The room had a golden glow and smelled like flowers. The first thing she noticed was the heart on the bed. I saw a small tear, and when she turned and kissed me, I knew it had gone well this time. I thought we'd start with dessert, and if there's room left, we can have dinner. I reached down to grab a few pieces of chocolate. "Just don't mess it up. I want to take a picture because no one will ever believe it." With the picture taken, we cleaned everything off the bed and had a glass of wine each. "Here's to us," was all that was said. Date night was a huge success. For the next couple weeks, we tried to outdo each other. And then something happened. Beth had to go out of town on Tuesday and Wednesday. She came home on Thursday, and as soon as she walked in the door, I immediately knew something was wrong. I got the usual kiss, but it was tepid, not what I expected. "Do you want to have a date night tonight?" I asked. "Steve, not tonight. I'm tired, and it's been a long week." The next week it was her turn, and this time nothing was scheduled, and she excused herself, saying she thought she had something going on. When I made an innocent comment about work and Carla, she nearly blew my head off. "Relax, baby, I was just kidding," I told her. But that set the mood for that night and the next two. Something was definitely wrong, and it must have happened on her last trip. I ignored it for another 2 weeks, and when date night wasn't even mentioned, I took offense. When the kids were already in bed and Beth was bouncing on the walls, I grabbed a Corona, a glass of wine, my wife, and took it all out on the porch. "Either you tell me what happened on your last trip, or I'm calling Carl right now and asking for him." From the tone of my voice, Beth realized I was serious. "Steve, nothing happened. I'm just a little stressed, that's all." As I picked up her planner and started dialing, she snatched the phone from me. "Steve, please don't. I can take care of this myself." "Take care of what?" "Take care of my problem. Please give me a little more time, that's all I ask." "Okay, 24 hours and then I'll intervene. Do you understand?" She nodded her head and walked over to me to kiss me. I realized from the look in her eyes that this was no small problem. Something had happened on her last trip and she didn't want me to know what it was. My brain kicked into high gear. I had trouble sleeping that night, but she didn't seem to sleep at all. I looked back at her a few times and saw that she was still awake. I fell asleep again, and when I woke up, she was already dressed and making breakfast for the girls. "Steve, would you be a dear and get the girls ready for school this morning, okay?" "Sure, honey, no problem." She then walked over to me, kissed me hard, and told me she loved me. Something was definitely wrong. All day I did nothing. All I could do was stare at the damn clock, waiting for 5 o'clock to come. I almost called Beth a few times, but fought the urge. At 5, I jumped out of the office like a bullet out of a gun and headed home. I almost ran into the house, tripping over the threshold. Beth was finishing cooking dinner and said we'd talk later. Throughout dinner, her eyes never once met mine. When the table was cleared and the dishes washed, I put on a DVD for the kids and grabbed my wife. "Okay, spill it." I wasn't being too diplomatic today. I quit my job today. It had gotten too stressful and was distancing us from each other. You and the girls are the most important thing in my life, and no job is worth the three of you. Stunned doesn't even come close to describing how I felt. You were doing so well, and we were doing so well, weren't we? Steve, I just didn't want to take any chances. It wasn't something that was easy for me to do. I knew that. She'd spent years studying and working to get where she'd gotten. Had she really given that up to keep our marriage intact? Or was there something else at play here? I suspected she wasn't telling me everything. How much warning did you give them? None. Today was my last day there. Steve, I can always find another job, especially one that doesn't involve traveling. I thought you'd be happy. Beth, you love that job. It doesn't make sense. Steve, I love you and our kids more. She came over and kissed me and gave me a long hug. I could have sworn she was crying inside. Jill, I need your help, I told her the next morning. I need you to find me the name of Beth and Carl's boss at Anderson and Phillips and set up a meeting under the pretense of expanding the business. Tell him whatever story you want. I just need to talk to him outside the office. Steve, what the hell is going on? Beth quit her job yesterday and I want to find out the reason why. Can't you just ask her? I did. I don't believe what she told me. Something happened on her last business trip and I want to know what. Steve, I'll do my best, but we usually go to their sales manager. Tell them that you understand that the designer you worked with has left their firm and you need assurances that they can continue to provide us with the same quality. Hell, tell them you're going to give up your business. I don't care what, just have him come here. I'll try, but what happens when he gets here? I'll take over everything from then on. I have a bad feeling it has something to do with that asshole boss of hers, but I can't be sure. Give me some time, I'll get back to you. Just don't do anything stupid. I told her I wouldn't, and sincerely hoped I could keep that promise. The CEO's name is David Thoreaus. He'll be here tomorrow at 3:30. He's also bringing the sales manager with him. Great. You take care of the sales manager and I'll take care of David. Why don't you talk to Beth again tonight? Talk, don't yell, and maybe you'll find out what happened. Do you want me to talk to her? No way, that's where it started. She was discussing our personal life with her boss, Carl. Hell, the son of a bitch's wife divorced him, and he was giving Beth advice. If I didn't know better, I'd swear he had his eye on her. Steve, talk to her, and for God's sake, don't forget the damn rose tonight. At least she'll know you really care about her and trust her. Life in our house was tense for the second night in a row. Beth was playing, and I do mean playing, the perfect housewife, and I was analyzing every word that came out of her mouth. We were already getting ready for bed when I came at her like a sledgehammer. What happened on that last trip with Carl? The look on her face I can only describe as utter fear. I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing happened. I told you. I was just tired from work. That's all. Beth, why don't I believe you? I've known you long enough to know when you're lying to me, and right now you're lying through your teeth. She was silent for a very long time. I studied her face. Steve, just leave it alone. If you love me the way you say you do, just leave it alone. Tears appeared in her eyes. I can't, baby. And even if I could, I wouldn't. Something happened and I'm going to find out what it was. Either from you or Carl, take your pick. Her eyes said it all. Her eyes weren't just watery, it was as if they had burst a dam. I'm so sorry it wasn't my fault, she screamed, throwing herself into my arms and nearly knocking me down as she sobbed on my shoulder. She was saying something about herself and Carl, but I didn't understand a word. Beth, calm down, please calm down, I tried to tell her, but it didn't help, as soon as she looked at me, she burst out another batch of tears. I decided it was better to let her cry than to try to make conversation with her. 20 minutes later, limp, red-eyed Beth had calmed down enough to look at me without tears. Are you okay? I asked, trying to brush away the remnants of tears. No, but what's the point? Beth, what happened? And don't tell me anything else? It's not my fault. I didn't do anything. You have to believe me, Steve. Beth, I believe you. Please just tell me what happened. We had just finished working with a client on Wednesday and took him out to dinner. We had a couple drinks each in honor of the new ad campaign. We said goodnight to him, and Carl and I sat at the bar and had another round of drinks. We were both excited, and when we were done, Carl asked me if we could go over the mock-ups one more time. We went up to his room, and that's where it all went downhill. Beth, it was probably too late. Why didn't you just say you'd do it tomorrow? Steve, he's my boss, and it was my idea. This isn't the first time we've met late at night. Well, like I said, we went to his room and went over the 3 layouts they had chosen. He asked if I wanted another drink. I said no, and then he started talking about his divorce that was finalized last week. Steve, you have to believe I was just listening to him talk about his ex. He got angrier and angrier as he continued. When he asked about you and me, I told him we were doing great. That's when he became furious. He started yelling about what a loser and pathetic piece of shit you are. Steve, I was in shock and just sat there with my mouth open listening to him rant and rave about you. Why didn't you just get up and leave? He's an angry man, and the alcohol probably only fueled his rage. Steve, I tried. I got up and said I had to leave because I had to get everything together. That's when things got out of hand. He said I needed a real man, not a wimp, and started coming on to me. He grabbed me, ripped my blouse, and started lifting my skirt. Her tears flowed. My face was getting redder with every word she said. I could feel the heat building up inside, and at the same time I tried not to lose it, at least not yet. I screamed, kicked his legs, finally pulled away, but I lost my blouse. When he started walking towards me again, I opened the door and ran to my room, which was only 2 doors away. I somehow managed to insert my card and make it work, but how exactly, I don't know. My hands were shaking so badly. He called my room twice, but I didn't pick up. I took the longest shower of my life. I just wanted to wash away all traces of his presence. I stood up and paced back and forth. I was so angry I couldn't sit still and did my best not to snap in front of my very upset wife. She was traumatized enough as it was. I knelt down in front of my wife and took her face in my hands. Honey, you didn't do anything wrong. I love you, darling. But why didn't you tell me about it when you got home? The next day, Carl apologized and said he had too much to drink. I told him I was going to report him to his boss and that my days of traveling with him were over. Carl said if I blabbed, he would ruin my reputation in the company. He said it was my word against his word and that he would tell everyone that I came to see him because I was having marital problems. He told me he would start a rumor that this was not the first time this had happened. Steve, I was scared. We had just started dating and I figured if I didn't say anything, it would go away on its own. I was wrong. 2 days ago, Carl said I was smart not to say anything. He told me that we were going on a trip next week and I was going whether I liked it or not. I guess I just lost my head then. I needed to get away from him and that damn company. Honey, you could have gone to HR and told them they're legally obligated to investigate. Tell them what? That Carl tried to rape me? Everyone in the office knew how tight-knit he and I were. Hell, he took me to lunch once a week. He worked there for almost 20 years. Do you really think they'd believe me over him? That's why I quit. I just couldn't go there anymore. She lowered her head and started crying again. I'm not a violent person, but right now, if I had a gun, I would have gotten in my car and put Carl out of his misery. I knew violence was not the answer. 3 other people depended on me. However, I was going to avenge Beth, one way or another. I took Beth in my arms and just held her until my girls came over to see what we were doing. Girls, would you mind going upstairs and putting on pajamas for me? I'll be upstairs soon to put you to bed. What's wrong with Mommy? Asked Linda, looking at the 2 of us. Mommy's not feeling very well right now, but she'll be better soon. They both ran up the stairs laughing, expecting me to run after them like I did every night. Are you okay? No, but having you here makes it easier. Go upstairs and leave everything to me. Steve, don't do anything, please. I'll never forgive myself if you do something and we get taken away. Beth, look at me. I won't do anything to jeopardize our life together. You have my word. I kissed her gently on the lips and then her forehead. I have 2 little ones to put to bed. Meet me in our bedroom. A short story, a kiss for each, a little tickle, and the lights went out for my girls. Beth was already in bed and looking exhausted. How she was holding up after that night, I don't know, but at least the first of it was behind her. I cuddled her until she finally fell asleep, and I spent the next 6 hours playing it over and over in my mind, figuring out what I should do. By the time she woke up, I'd already gotten the kids off to school and was about to wind down. Then 2 phone calls and a missed lunch is how the first part of my day went. I briefly told Jill what Beth had said and informed her that I needed the rest of the week off. However, if she heard screaming this afternoon, not to worry, I wasn't going to go to jail for murder unless Carl was with him. David Thoreau's wasn't a large man, probably no taller than 5 feet 7 inches. Jill grabbed the sales manager and I led David into my office. We sat down. I offered him a bottle of water and then put the phone down. David, my wife, Beth Moore, worked for you until last week. I know Beth. She was a hard worker and a great designer. I was sorry to see her go. Do you know why she left? I asked, trying to find out what he knew. I think it was because of family problems. I hope there are no serious problems with anyone in your family, he said really sincerely. Well, there are, but after today, probably not anymore, I said to a puzzled David. Do you know the law firm of Stewart and Edwards? Who doesn't know? It's the largest firm in the Southeast. And guess what? They're representing Beth in a sexual harassment case against your company. That got his attention. You see, Beth's former boss, Carl, did something wrong on their last business trip, and if I didn't have 2 toddlers at home, I'd have already sent him either to the hospital or to his grave, depending on how things went. My expression turned stone cold. I just told them to put a D in as many zeros as they want. The paperwork is due tomorrow. I figured I'd give you a heads up since you were Beth and our Carl's boss. Steve, why didn't Beth go to the ICU with her accusations? I told him the story Beth had told me. I think when the lawyers dig deep enough, I expect they'll uncover at least one other incident that Carl was involved in. A case like this is like candy for a child in the eyes of the media. They'll eat it up. Steve, are you trying to blackmail Anderson and Phillips? Not at all. I'm just telling you that the wrath of God is coming, and it won't be pleasant, that's all. So this whole meeting was set up so you could talk to me? I only smiled. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to the office. I seem to have a few things I need to take care of. Believe it or not, we shook hands, and I told him it was personal, but not with him. He said he would be in touch and asked me to do nothing for 24 to 48 hours. I told him I would think about it. Grabbing his sales manager, he was out the door in 2 minutes. I didn't hear any yelling, Jill said, as she entered my office. No need. I think he figured it out. I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but I need to take care of my wife right now. It's not. Go get the hell out of here, and if you need anything, just call. Please tell Beth we're thinking of her. I gathered my things and left. I found her still in her robe at the kitchen table, a cup of iced coffee in front of her. I walked through the door and she almost jumped into my arms. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. We just stood there while I held her in my arms. Eventually, the tears did come because I felt the moisture on my shirt. Don't worry, I'll take care of it, I told her. We stood like that in the kitchen. Go upstairs and take a hot shower and get dressed. Mom will bring the kids home soon and I'll figure out what we can eat. It was the easiest thing I'd had to do in the last 48 hours. Pizza Hut. I'd like to order a large cheese pizza. With pizza on the table and a new Disney movie from Netflix, my girls' lives got better. Beth was looking better, and I think a little more relaxed about being out in the open. After a raucous and persistent evening, the kids settled into their cribs, but Beth still couldn't look away from the walls, a glass of wine in her hands. How could I have been so stupid? You saw it. Why couldn't I? Honey, you were too close, and I think Carl is an evil man who just snapped. Whatever the reason, don't worry. He'll pay. One way or another, they'll all pay. My blood pressure started to rise again. No one is going to ruin my family's life and get away with it, I told myself. After another glass of wine, Beth was ready to go to bed. Exhausted and emotionally drained, she climbed into bed, pulled me to her, and drifted off to sleep. Anger, frustration, and about 10 other emotions raced through my body as I cuddled my sleeping wife. I should have said or done something sooner and maybe this wouldn't have happened, I said, beginning to not only doubt myself, but also to berate myself for what had happened to my wife. I eventually fell asleep over the next 3 hours. I let Beth sleep while I fed and prepared my brood for school. I told them that Mom was still asleep and that we should be quiet. They giggled and said it was okay. They smiled at each other as they ate their breakfast. I drove them to school, gave them each a big kiss, and headed home. I don't really like pizza, and only had one slice last night, so this morning my stomach explicitly let me know it was hungry. Scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, and a few slices of bacon lay in the dust waiting for my wife to wake up. Around 9:30, I heard her rummaging around upstairs. She finally emerged about 10 minutes later. "What are you doing home?" "I took a couple days off, nothing much. Figured you needed me more than Greg." She smiled and sat down on the stool next to me. "I'm sorry about all of this. I thought he was my friend." "There's nothing to be sorry about. You didn't do anything wrong," I said, looking into her brown eyes that were still red and puffy. "But I don't have a job anymore. How are we going to be able to afford everything?" "Relax, trust me, okay?" I said, kissing her lips. "It's not like we're poor. We'll find something, so don't worry about it, okay?" She smiled, but in a forced sort of way. She was eating breakfast and I was checking my email. Jill had sent me an email asking me to take as much vacation time as I needed. My work email had 2 more emails from vendors, and all the others were just spam. Beth came downstairs dressed, and for the next 2 hours I watched her bounce off the walls again. She did the dishes, then went from room to room looking for something to occupy her time. When your brain is used to working non-stop from 8 hours to 5 and then doing nothing, I imagine it's hard to adjust to that. "Beth, let's go for a ride," I said, grabbing her hand. We ended up at the mall. While she browsed the racks of clothes, I just watched her. I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket. "Steve, David Theruse called looking for you a few minutes ago. I gave him your cell number, so expect his call. How's Beth doing?" "Fine, I guess. We're at the mall, shopping, really trying to pass the time." "Nothing like shopping to take your mind off your troubles. Let me know if there's anything I can do," said Jill and hung up. She was a good boss. Beth said she was going to try on a few things just before I got another call. "Steve, David Theruse here." "What can I do for you, Mr. Therose?" I asked. "To be blunt, we talked to Carl and he told us a completely different story," Therose began to say. "That doesn't surprise me," I replied. "And we're at a loss as to how to proceed in such a case." He paused, apparently waiting for my response or reaction. "David, I don't care at all what you do. We're going to proceed with our lawsuit, and I believe that is where it will end. Mr. Moore, perhaps we can come to some sort of agreement?" I stopped him. "David, are you married?" "Yes, married." "And if this happened to your wife, what would you do?" Silence ensued. "Now ask yourself what would happen if my wife took a lie detector test and passed with flying colors. I know it's not 100% foolproof, and your lawyers will argue the same thing. But you and I know that a jury won't look at it that way, especially if Carl fails or fails the test, as I know he will. I don't care how good or slick your lawyers are, you're going to lose and my lawyers are going to get more than the pound of flesh they're asking for." I hung up and put the phone back in my pocket. Over the next 2 hours, we hit 4 more stores and walked away with one blouse. If it was a guy, he'd try one on, and if it fit him, it would be over. Hell, in all seriousness, he probably wouldn't even try it on. I called our lawyer, Mr. Donnelly of Stewart and Edwards, and told him about my call. "The paperwork won't be ready until a day or 2 later, and if they call you back, just refer them to me. That's what we're here for." Shortly before 4 in the afternoon, Mr. Therose called again. "Steve, we have a suggestion for you and Beth so we can hopefully put all this behind us. David, I have been instructed that you are to speak to my attorney from now on." "Steve, I thought you said you were going to give me between 24 and 48 hours?" "That's right. Nothing has been filed yet. It's just that I need my attorney to review all the proposals in advance. That's what I'm paying him for." He was displeased, to say the least. "But don't you want to at least hear our offer? Does it include firing Carl?" There was a pause. "Then I guess I don't even have to listen to it." I gave him Mr. Donnelly's phone number. "Who was that?" asked Beth, walking into the kitchen. "Wrong number. How about we all go out to dinner together? It's Friday night and none of us have to get up early tomorrow." "Steve, we have to watch our money a lot more carefully now that I'm not working. No, I don't think going to Johnny Rockets for a few burgers and shakes is going to break the bank." Friday night was still a little tense, but we talked again. I assured her that I loved her with all my heart and soul and that everything would be okay. Did she believe me? Not completely, but she let me launch myself. I received an email from Mr. Donnelly, and according to my parameters, declined their offer. He said he wasn't surprised that they tried to underbid the first time. He told me not to worry. He would work it out. I wasn't worried, but I wanted my normal life and my wife back. By Sunday morning, life started to get back to normal. We both knew that I would have to go back to work on Monday and she would be alone in an empty house. Eventually, she asked what I was doing, seeing emails here and there and overhearing my conversations with one person or another. I explained to her what was going on. I just want Carl fired for what he did, that's all. Anderson and Phillips have been fair to me all these years and I have no beef with them, Beth said. It doesn't make any difference now. I had to drag them into this case to get to Carl. Do you really believe they would have said, "Sure, Steve. No problem. What else do you need?" I don't think so. So when you pull out the big guns, negotiations take on a whole new meaning, I hoped. Sunday night we made love. I waited for Beth to make the first move, not wanting to rush her after what she had been through. I didn't pound her and bring her to 10 orgasms to show her that she was still mine. We just started kissing and let it go at that. Damn it. I loved this woman, and I was hurting for what had happened to her. On Monday, Jill was there for me like a mother hen and made sure I had everything I needed. She even sent Beth a bouquet of flowers and pizza for lunch. Steve, I feel so bad for her and I don't know what to do. And then it hit me. She needed something to occupy her thoughts. Why don't you have her design another advertising layout for you? It'll give her something to do while she sits home alone and bounces off the walls. She smiled and walked out of my office. I didn't hear anything until Wednesday morning. My lawyer called and said he had received another offer that Beth and I needed to consider. Is this what we've been looking for? Not exactly, but very close. I sent it by messenger to your house. Let me know what you want to do after you look it over. I called Beth to let her know I was coming and told her I'd be home shortly after 3 o'clock. They were offering a lot of money to hush up the incident. Hell, they even asked if she was going back to work. However, they missed one important point. There was nothing in the contract that said anything about Carl getting fired. I called my lawyer back. Tell them we're going to sue and double the amount we're asking for. Maybe that will get their attention. I was tired of being lied to. Wednesday and Thursday, Beth was in good spirits. She and Jill were redoing all the advertising layouts she'd designed for them over the past 9 months. Jill has given me free rein, and I can do whatever I want. She even announced that I was looking for work and would cut my prices at other agencies by 15%. She had a look in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. I asked Beth if she wanted to take a little family vacation. Honey, we can take the kids and go to the beach tomorrow and spend Saturday and Sunday enjoying the surf and sand. What do you say? I think it's time to get things back on track, but let's watch what we spend. I don't want us to run out of money this month. Now she was really worried about what we had or didn't have. I promise we won't go broke, but I think we all need it. Besides, I make enough to cover all of our expenses, and with what we've already put aside, we won't be on the street anytime soon. I made sure there was plenty of laughter and good times for everyone. We didn't get a chance to fool around in the same motel room, but we did make out a lot. 2 margaritas put Beth to sleep Saturday night, and I stayed out on the balcony in the dark, listening to the sound of the surf, reflecting on how our lives had changed, and getting angry all over again while doing so. On Sunday, we had breakfast on the motel deck next to the pool, and after a quick dip in the water, we went back to the room, ready to leave. We drove home on a scenic road, following the surf until we had to turn away from the coast. All the way home, we held hands, and the girls talked about how nice it would be to live on the coast. Monday afternoon, I received a call from Stewart, and Edwards, asking Beth and me to come to their office. With Beth in my arms, we walked into the swankiest office I had ever seen. I should have been a lawyer, not in construction. We were seated in a large conference room. A well-dressed receptionist came in and asked if we wanted anything to eat or drink. We told her, "No, thank you." With those words, she turned and left the room and left us alone. Steve, whatever they're offering, let's just take it and be done with it, okay? If Carl gets what he deserves, I agree with you. Neither of us wanted this to drag on forever. A man came in, introduced himself as Mr. Donnelly, shook our hands, and sat down at his desk. "We've received a final offer from Anderson and Phillips. Take it or leave it," he said, looking at the folder on his desk. "It has everything you were looking for, and in my opinion, it's a more than fair offer. The only thing they're asking for is a signed release from all future litigation by Beth, and the previous job offer rescinded." "There's no way I'm going back there anyway," Beth replied, looking at me and squeezing my hand. "Well then, if you'd like, we can go over the details of their offer," he said, sliding a copy toward us. Beth looked at me and I looked at her and smiled. She ended up signing some papers, Mr. Donnelly handed us copies of all the documents, and we headed home. The trip was fairly uneventful until she spoke. "I'm glad that bastard got fired and that he won't get a letter of recommendation. I hope that son of a bitch burns in hell," was how she ended her statement. "We had a normal dinner with our girls and watched the movie Cars for the 100th time this year. After a little scuffle, I chased them down the stairs and we all laughed and screamed. My wife yelled for me to be gentle with them. I read them a short story they could probably recite by heart and finally got them into bed with a kiss and a hug." Beth was already in bed when I got to our bedroom. I undressed, went to the bathroom, flossed my teeth, and turned off the light as I entered our bedroom. She was lying in bed reading a book. I sank down next to her. "Good night," I said, and rolled over onto my side, pulling the blanket over my shoulder. Just then I was attacked. "Isn't there anything you want to say?" she said, putting her arm around my waist. "About what?" said I, smiling. She slapped my arm. "You know what about. You mean the fact that we're kinda rich now? Is that what you're talking about?" "Asshole. I thought I was going to lose it at that damn law firm. $850,000, can you imagine? Like I said, we're almost rich. It's not enough to make me quit my job, but life will be a lot easier from now on. I can start my own design business, and even if I make half of what I've been making, we'll be on easy street." "Stop talking about money," I said, grabbing her. "I know how we can celebrate if you know what I mean." We made love that night and the next 3 nights after that. From that point on, life got a lot easier. Beth opened 4 accounts that first year and 7 the following year. Now 2 women worked for her full-time in our newly renovated garage. The houses are still being built, and Greg pushes me every month to learn more about the business. And Carl? Well, he was fired when it turned out this wasn't the first time he'd been accused of harassment, and the other 2 times it was hushed up. I think that's why they decided to settle out of court. We were at a friend's birthday party when we found out. A drunk Carl drove drunk on the highway in front of a tractor trailer going about 60 miles an hour. After the fire subsided, they found enough fragments to identify the body. It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. As the t-shirt says, life is good. Now, as I lay in bed next to my fiancé, I think back to that first night and smile. Our journey may not have been the smoothest or easiest, but it ended up being the best I could have hoped for. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.